Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by the fine people at CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. Ant, it's cold today in Arizona, 59 degrees, and raining cats and dogs in the desert, literally all day, not 5 minutes.
Wow.
And this is the Day of the Dead as we record this, so I'm going to go out and watch a parade in this horrific weather. So I'm in an uncommonly good mood, which leads me to hope and dream that you might actually be able to continue it when I ask, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
I ran across this thing that as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to mention it. In fact, we're going to make a whole episode out of it today, actually.
You might recall that on an episode not too terribly long ago, I announced, is that the correct word? I mean, who could have doubted it in the first place? My love of mushrooms. Not the kind you eat. I hate the kind you eat. Mushrooms are disgusting.
We've been getting email on that.
And we have. People have been asking us to do an episode while under the influence of mushrooms, which I think is the greatest idea in the history of ideas. Because I know I'd walk right through it and you would be Planet X the entire time. And this is what I really want.
Well, the camera's on. You can see the cops come in, one then the other, and haul us away.
Well, just that, Ant. We might not have to do it because this week I want to talk about a ballot initiative in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, where they're looking to become the third state to decriminalize mushrooms.
Wow.
How about that?
Yeah.
We might be able to do this episode legally, which admittedly takes half the fun right out of it. You know, here we are 2 days before the election. I have literally no idea how this is going to work out. All I've got to say is, I hope you're happy with yourselves. However it worked out, I hope you're happy with yourself.
And that's assuming it has worked out by the time this airs. It's entirely possible that it's still up in the air.
That's right. It'll only be a week or two. We're probably not going to have a conclusion. And that brings me to another thing, actually, because all of the election conspiracy people lose their minds when states say we are not going to have a result on election night. Well, shouldn't they lose their minds if a tightly contested state has a result very quickly?
Right.
Wouldn't that make more sense? It's going to take a while to count these stinking votes.
Yeah.
And, you know, California and New York can declare that Kamala Harris won those states 5 seconds after the polls close, because that's what's going to happen. Well, Wisconsin, Iowa, no. Pennsylvania, absolutely not. They're going to take a minute. I looked this up not too long ago, and most states have 2 to 3 weeks by their own laws after the election to come up with their final result.
So the exit polls that the media announces, am I correct? Those are people literally standing outside the voting area asking people as they come out who they voted for?
That's correct. And you can see why that's not going to work anymore, right? Because tens of millions, maybe even 100 million Americans are going to vote ahead of time.
Yeah, I did.
Does that skew one way or the other?
I don't know. It could.
It could. Does it skew male or female? It does. What does that mean to an exit poll that has to balance all of these things? And this is why polling is so difficult right now. It's not just that you ask people who they want to be president. You do that. But then you have to ask, are you a likely voter? If you're a likely voter, did you actually vote? Are you a Democrat or a Republican? Are you an independent? Are you male or female? How old are you? All of these things, in addition to scores of others, have to be balanced. And what we've seen over time, the last 2 elections, Donald Trump's vote has been underestimated pretty considerably. When that happens, Ant, pollsters adjust their methodology.
Right.
Is Trump's vote going to be overestimated now because of the adjustments? I don't know. We'll find out after the fact. Polling is great at predicting the past. It's only marginally good at predicting the future.
I have this gut feeling that people, particularly people in more liberal areas who are going to vote for Trump, are going to be loath to admit it.
Well, and that's the David Duke phenomenon, right? When Duke was running for offices, I believe it was governor, maybe senator of Louisiana, he was a Klansman and a pretty proud Klansman, actually. And when asked, people would never admit that they were voting for him, and his vote dwarfed the predictive vote.
Yeah. My own experience, I went to vote early, I guess maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, But nonetheless, I go there and they've got the election workers out front. Of course, they're handing out pamphlets and whatnot. And, I just kind of automatically take the one that the first woman I encountered was handing out for Donald Trump. And the way that I realize this is she's handing out the paper and I'm not even listening to her. I just take it. And she has this surprised look on her face. And I look and I see it's paperwork for voting Republican. I said to her, "You seem quite surprised." She said, "Well, yeah, not many people around here would take this." But then I went and took one from the Democratic woman as well, just so I look even-handed.
We've got the foolishness of the week. You might recall, Ant, when I picked on your beloved Catholic Church recently, when they had chatbots taking confession. Do you remember this?
Oh, right. Father, whatever his name was.
Not to be left out in the cold, here comes the Episcopalian Church with churchy answers that help you, also known as Kathy, an AI chatbot that answers faith-based questions from the perspective of a friendly, knowledgeable Episcopalian.
And I'm going to take it. They didn't learn anything from the Catholics here.
As is so often the case. We've watched the Catholics step into an open manhole and
say, "Hold my beer."
Clutching to the frock of the cleric in front of them. Here come the Episcopalians. I got nothing else. That's enough, right? That's just...
It didn't blow up on them?
Oh, no, it's not working correctly, and it apparently punts badly when asked how to deal with social anxiety. But, grown adults shouldn't be asking about social anxiety in the first place. They should maybe, and hear me, people, suck it up and get on with life.
Businesses have got to be really careful here. There was a court case, and it was a lower court ruling recently, wherein some business, it sticks in my mind, it was an airline, although don't quote me on that. Somebody complained, the chatbot promised to give the money back. The company never gave the money back. The guy sues and the company says,
"You're on the hook for that. You start the chatbot in motion. You're on the hook."
That's what the court said, that you put this chatbot out there representing you. And, if it says the wrong thing, that's on you, buddy. It's not on the customer.
That's right. That's right. I think it's more on a chatbot than it is on a human.
And what happens when at some point you get Episcopalian Church, Catholic Church, whatever, fill in the blank, some other thing, with their chatbot that's designed to help people in some way, and the chatbot goes off the rails and starts advising them to commit suicide?
Well, I'm more looking forward to when the chatbot advises them to convert to Judaism.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
I found this thing and it was going to be my quick hit, and I sent it off to James and said, "Oh, look at this interesting thing."
For a hot second, it was going to be the foolishness of the week, too.
Yeah, and then we decided, no, we can actually do a whole episode on this. But here's what would have been the quick hit. A court in Russia has fined Google because when...
You've already lost me. You said a court in Russia, and I tuned right out. This is not where we go to find out about justice, common sense, or much of anything else.
Oh, right, which will become clear in a moment. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, Google shut off from YouTube some Russian government-sponsored channels. And the Russian government sued, and the Russian court said, verily, yes, Google should not have shut off these YouTube channels, and fined Google, and this was back in 2020, $1,000 a day. But here's the kicker. It doubled every day that went by that Google did not pay.
That's going to yield a fantastical amount very quickly.
Yes, it is now up to $20 decillion.
Go ahead and tell the people what a decillion even is.
Well, see, this gets really hard, James. I'll read off, and this is in 1,000 orders of magnitude. So you got $1,000, then you go to 1,000,000, which is 1,000 times 1,000. Then you go to 1 billion, which is 1,000 times 1,000,000, right? So million, billion, trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion, septillion, octillion, nontillion, decillion. It's a 2 followed by 33 zeros. CNN reported that this was a 2 followed by 36 zeros. CNN is off by a factor of 1,000. And yet, they're basically right. $2 decillion. So just to give you some perspective here, I don't know if the perspective works. If you think about just the interest on 20 decillion, so forget about the 20 decillion fine, just pay interest on a loan of that amount. If Google were to borrow that much money and using it to pay off the fine that it has, the interest on 20 decillion is about 3 septillion. See, and that doesn't help us at all, right?
No, because 3 septillion and 20 whatever
decillion,
it was.
right, exactly.
Those are still the same number.
Right, so
still the same number.
This isn't going to help either, but the interest on that on a per second basis is more than 10 times the number of stars in the universe, right? So what do you do with this, right? If we were to take the entire world GDP and put it just toward the interest on the fine, forget about the fine, put it toward the interest on the fine, it's too little by a factor of 10 quintillion. The numbers are just absolutely ridiculous.
10 quintillion, another number that we cannot understand.
The court could have just said you owe infinity dollars, and functionally it would have been the same answer, but everybody would understand it.
And here the court missed a beautiful opportunity, because what they should have done is find them a Google dollars.
Right. A Google dollars.
How do you miss that? I guess maybe most people don't know that Google is a number.
Right. Yes. It's 10 to the 100th power, I think. A 1 followed by 100 zeros, something like that. But we're back into this space of ridiculous numbers.
That's right. But why not find them a Google? And
Right.
I think, the original fine was surely in rubles, so maybe that makes some kind of difference.
Oh, no, this has been converted to dollars now.
So, okay, perfect.
And this is the thing that is kind of interesting to me, talking as much as I do about the federal debt. I'm used to trying to help people understand numbers in the billions and trillions and what this means. But this number is so far beyond that, I cannot tell you.
Whenever we wrote about the debt, which was quite a lot, you would always say the same thing. We need an analogy to explain this, but then we need an analogy to explain the analogy.
Right. Here, we're like 6 or 7 analogies deep to get to this number.
Oh, I suspect we might be far deeper than that.
It's
far
astounding.
Deeper. This is the world GDP dwarfed.
Oh, yeah. Dwarfed, like we're talking about a grain of sand versus the sun. That kind of dwarfed.
Literally, the output of planet Earth wouldn't make a dent in this fine.
No.
So what on earth is this court trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think somebody just wasn't thinking through the power of doubling. Do you know that story? I don't know if it's true because it dates back apparently 1,000 years plus, of the guy who invented chess.
No.
The story is the guy invented chess and he brought it to whoever it was. This was, multiple thousands of years ago. The king and said, I've got this game. The king loved it and said, whatever you want, I'll give you palaces, land, cows, whatever. And the guy said, I don't ask for much. I want 1 grain of sand for the first square on the chessboard, 2 for the next, 4 for the next, doubling for each of the squares on the chessboard. There's only 64 squares there. Well, it turns out that you double for 64 squares and you end up with a number like this. It's unbelievably large. So the king ends up just killing the guy.
Well, he did overreach.
Yeah, so too this court. I mean, the overreach is so gargantuan that, you just walk away from this. It's not worth anybody's time to even address this.
Nobody can take this seriously.
Yeah.
I say this often. And it's almost always in the context of California's idiotic regulations on businesses and what have you. Just don't do business there.
Go.
And, if Alphabet wants to shut down all of its offerings to the country of Russia, so be it. There's no rule that says they have to get Google and YouTube and Gmail and all the rest. Let's see what that country looks like when Google flips a switch and nobody there can use any of their services. Wouldn't that be something? I would love to be a fly on the wall if and when that ever happened. I mean, can you just imagine it, shutting off all the Gmail addresses to an entire country with no warning, just overnight? Which is why, incidentally, you might want to back up your email. I'm just saying. These sorts of things happen, right? But, This gets us into a broader consideration, something that we've talked about before, and that's the time value of money.
Yeah, and this is a little bit different because we've done an episode on the time value of money, maybe a year ago, maybe a bit less.
Yeah, it was a while back.
And I want to talk about something here that's related to that, but it is a distinct idea. And that is that you can equate stocks of money to flows of money. And maybe a good way to think about this is think about the Mega Millions. The Mega Millions, I just looked it up as of today.
Yeah, I'm planning on winning this week.
Right. The prize before taxes is 300 million. After taxes, it's 216.
The government takes a healthy bite.
Yeah, taxes take a huge bite. But it gets worse than that because what happens is Mega Millions will give you the choice of you can have your prize broken out, or maybe they don't give you a choice.
No, they give you a choice. You get a lump sum or an annuity.
Lump sum or annuity. Yeah, and the annuity...
An annuity is always a sucker bet.
It is the sucker bet, but that's how they came up with the $216 million number. It's $216 million, but payable over 30 years. So you take 216 divided by 30, that's like $7 million a year that they'd be paying you. And they do the math. They say, look, that's $216 million.
Or you can have less if you take a lump sum.
Yeah, and here's the thing. How do you come up with the lump sum? And that's the topic that we're talking about here of equating stocks and flows. And this $7 million a year, you call that a flow. You got a flow of money, a stream of income that's going to come in over time, $7 million a year. Or you could take a lump sum right now, that's the stock. And it turns out there's I shouldn't say an easy way, but there is a way to ask the question, which of those two animals is the better deal? And it wouldn't seem like there is a way to do that because it seems like you're comparing apples and oranges here. But actually, there's a way to do that. Maybe an example is good here. Let's suppose you have $1,000 and you could spend it now, or you can invest it and as it accrues interest every year, you spend the interest. Forget about inflation. For the sake of argument, you get 5% interest. So you put your $1,000 in the bank every year, it creates $50 in interest income. So the choice in front of you is, do I spend my $1,000 right now, or do I spend $50 a year forever?
Spend it now.
Well, see, but there's no right answer to this, right? People's answers will vary.
Yes, there is. It'd take me 10 years to buy a PlayStation if I wait with the interest.
Yeah, see, but that's the thing. Someone who is older might well say, well, give me the $1,000 now. Someone who's younger has, 90 years of life in front of them may come back and say, well, no, $50 a year over 90 years is substantially more than $1,000. I'd rather take that. There's not a right answer, but we are able to...
This is the question that's asked of children all the time.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want the cookie now or 2 cookies later?
Or you want 2 cookies tomorrow.
Yeah.
And every child grabs the cookie.
Right.
Look, you're dangling something in front of people, and that's motivational to begin with. But there's always the possibility that tomorrow doesn't come.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And by tomorrow not coming, I don't mean the world ends. I mean just that the person doesn't show up with 2 cookies.
Yeah. Or he does, and for whatever reason, you don't like cookies anymore.
Not hungry. I mean, there's a million different ways to sort this out. But the easy way to look at it is a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. And with government, say, and the government runs the lottery, do you trust the government will pay you every year for the next 30 years?
Yeah.
Or will they just merely confiscate that wealth at some point in the future?
Right.
And that has to be part of your calculation.
So there are these calculations and you can run them so that you can do this thing. And it comes down, in practical uses. For example, if you've got a choice when you retire, as some of us are going to have, your employer offers you a monthly pension for as long as you live or a lump sum, some amount of money right now. How do you know which of these 2 things is better? I mean, you can answer at a gut level, but the gut level isn't necessarily the best way to look at it. Or I should say, let me say it differently. What you should do is run the math, and there are ways to do this. You run the math to say, okay, $1,000 a month for the next 20 years is equivalent to $150,000 in my hand right now. Okay, then the question before you is you bring in your gut and you do things like you were doing of saying, well, I would much rather enjoy $150,000 now than $1,000 a month over time or whatever it is.
How many months am I going to live?
How many months are you going to live? Exactly. Right. Yeah. For simplicity, I've ignored inflation, but that becomes an issue too. Do you anticipate there's going to be higher inflation in the future? In which case, maybe you want the money now.
Maybe.
And I think it's possible that this kind of decision may end up being foisted upon younger generations as Social Security tries to figure out how it's going to continue. One possibility is that Social Security might turn to near retirees and say, okay, you can have your Social Security benefits as we promised them, or we'll cut you a check right now for this amount and that's all you get.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not going to work for Medicare.
No, it's not going to work for Medicare. And in fact, I think it would be a fool's errand with Social Security, because what would happen is so many people would not do the math. They'd take the amount of money, they'd blow it, and then all of a sudden we'd be faced with a social problem of hundreds of thousands of elderly having blown through their money and no Social Security left.
And we'd also end up with massive wholesale inflation again.
Then you got that problem when everybody turns around and buys a new car simultaneously, right? Yeah.
Well, the easy question to ask here is, why is it that people have such trouble understanding the nature of money?
I think because people bring an emotion to money. And not to say that emotion has no role. Emotion preference does have a role, but that's got to be the end game. You got to begin with a look at the cold, hard facts. Let me give you some numbers here. I'm going to do a sports thing.
Brace yourself, everybody.
Arizona Cardinals quarterback is the 9th most highly paid quarterback in the NFL.
And he's not the 9th best quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. Kyler Murray, his contract, it's a 5-year contract for $230 million. So what they do is they pay him $46 million a year over 5 years. Do the math, $230 million. And that's the way they describe it. They say this is a $230 million contract. In fact, it's not worth $230 million because he'll receive $46 million a year over 5 years. That's not the same as $230 million in his hand right now.
That's right.
And you can do the math here, and the number is about 180 cash in hand right now. Why the difference? Well, the difference in part, it's inflation, because 5 years from now, 46 million is not going to buy you what it buys today. Part of it's that. Part of it is simply he has to wait. That we'd all rather have money now than later. You'd rather have the cookie now than later. He's got to wait 5 years as this money builds up. And combined with that is your issue of, well, what happens over those 5 years? Does he have a debilitating injury such that he can't enjoy the 46 million nearly as much as he would have otherwise? Does he die, in which case he's not going to enjoy the 46 million? And so for all of these reasons, his contract in terms of cash in hand today is not 230 million, it's about 180.
Still a lot, but not the same.
Yeah, still a lot, but not the same. But this kind of math is the math that businesses do all the time. Everything from conducting R&D on a new product line all the way down to deciding whether to hire this particular guy who wants a $90,000 salary when we offered him 85, and we do the present value calculations here and we figure out what is this guy in cash in hand today costing the company, and they make a decision. So companies are doing this all the time. Households, not so much. When we talk about unfunded liabilities that Social Security has, the way we talk about this is we say, well, Social Security is promised to pay money to some people over time. It anticipates collecting some tax revenue over time, and the amount that it's going to pay out is going to be bigger than the tax revenue, and the difference there is $75 trillion. And people say, well, hang on. Social Security doesn't owe $75 trillion right now. That's an amount of money it's going to owe over the next 75 years. Yeah, except that $75 trillion is the result of this calculation I'm describing to you. That is, some smart people sat down and they said, okay, Social Security is going to have to pay out a certain amount of money every year for the next 75 years. It's going to collect a certain amount of money every year of this next 75 years. Put all these things together, do the present value calculations, and you come up with a number. That number is $75 trillion. And the way you interpret it, it's not that Social Security is going to be short $75 trillion over the next 75 years. It's that the amount that Social Security will be short over the next 75 years is financially identical to $75 trillion cash on the table right now.
That sounds quite horrible.
The point here is it's possible to talk about something that is occurring financially over many, many years and convert it into its equivalent number right now.
Reaching all the way back around, what would the Google court tell us in Russia? I guess this is not the way to go, right? There is no present value of that amount.
Oh, no, that is the present value. The 20 decillion is the present value.
Which means there is no present value.
Well, which means that if Google were to actually attempt to pay this, it would end up paying way more than 20 decillion physical dollar bills because it would be paying it over time. And it's not even worth talking about. It's infinity. But here's something to think about. I was running some numbers for retirement for the average American. People are starting to ask me, as I talk to older crowds now than I've talked to in the past, they start to ask me questions about, well, how much money do I need to have in savings to fund my retirement? And when someone asks that question, we do the same kind of calculations that we're describing here. We say, okay, here's a person who's going to live for so many years and spend a certain amount of money over the course of those years, and he needs to have a certain amount of money in the bank right now, the principal and interest of which will fund that lifestyle, whatever it is. And our economist's goal here is to come up with that number. How much money do you need cash in hand right now? And I came up with kind of an interesting rule of thumb. And the rule of thumb, it's based on the average American, and it accounts for how much the average American has earned over time and how much the average American can expect to get from Social Security. And when it's all done, the answer is, how much do you want to spend when you retire? Whatever that number is per year. Forget about where it's coming from. Just how much per year do you want to spend when you retire? And you could think of it, a good rule of thumb is, well, whatever you're spending now, probably plus or minus, that's what you're going to want to spend when you retire. Whatever that number is. When all the dust settles, multiply it by either 10 or 20, and that's how much savings you need. You multiply it by 10 if you're going to burn through your savings so that by the time you die, nothing's left. You multiply by 20 if you want to leave your initial savings to your heirs and you're just going to live off the interest. So basically it's that. So you say, I want to spend, let's say, $80,000 a year. Okay, you're going to need anywhere from $800,000 and $1.6 million. Now, of course, as we get older, we spend less, or if you're sickly, you spend more, right? So these things are up and down. You got insurance things. So don't take anything I've said as financial advice, but rather it's an illustration of the kinds of answers we can attempt to get at using this tool of present valueness and converting flows of cash into stocks of cash.
And most people, for whatever the reason, aren't going to have $2 million upon retirement.
No.
Not even close.
No.
And that's a lesson of another kind. We don't prepare for our own futures because we don't exactly understand the weight of the future balanced against the weight of the present.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem there is that we've been told there's Social Security from the time you first start working, you take Social Security taxes out, and in some sense that's going to come back to you later on. And by the time you turn your attention to this and say, okay, what am I actually getting? What do I need to do? By the time most people start asking those questions, it's too late.
Yeah, that's right. They look at the amount and they say, oh dear.
Right.
That's not enough.
So that's all I have to say about that this is a thing that we use to talk about these sorts of numbers. Notice that I've hemmed and hawed around how the calculations are actually done. The calculations are a little bit...
You do that all the time, by the way.
Yeah, they're a little bit more complicated what anyone is interested in going into here. But if you're particularly interested, if you've got a financial calculator, they have these things built in. They're called present value and future value functions. If you like to play with Excel, Excel has those functions as well. You can just dork around with it, and it becomes pretty obvious what kinds of numbers you need to put in to get the things out that you want.
So you can't give us an equation?
Oh, I could. Nobody wants to hear that, though.
Aunt, my heart would leap from my chest if you would just finally give us an equation.
You take the cash flow for each year and divide it by 1 plus the interest rate raised to a power, and the power is the number of years that elapse between now and the future, and add that up for every single year.
Wasn't nearly as complicated as I wanted it to be. Ah, well.
I gave you the dialed down version.
It's complicated enough that no one will even think about it from the moment they hear it forward. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.